welcome to another episode of Island Uplift's history class. It is so good to have you today. Now, in today's lesson, we will be taking a look at the Spanish colonial administration in the Caribbean. Now, these are the objectives that we would like to cover for this topic. Firstly, we want to look at the workings of the Spanish colonial system of government. Then we want to take a look at the organization known as the Council of the Indies. Then we will take a look at the local Spanish government in the Caribbean. Then we will look at economic developments. And finally, we'll take a look at the control of trade with specific emphasis on the Casa de Contratación and the Flota and Armada system. So let's get into it. Now, the conciliar system of government for the Spanish Empire went something like this. At the head of the table was the king. He was overseer of the entire empire, and under him were three institutions. Firstly, there was the Council of Castile, then there was the Council of Finance, and finally, there was the Council of the Indies. Now, each of these institutions were accountable to the king, although at times the Council of the Indies were also accountable to the Council of Castile. And the Council of Indies, they oversaw all matters that were associated with the New World, primarily the Americas and the Philippines. Now, the House of Castile was the ruling house in Spain. Therefore, the House of Castile was comprised of direct advisors to the king himself. All matters usually had to pass through this council before getting to the king's attention. The Council of Finance oversaw the revenue and expenditure of the empire. They had a hand in most colonial matters. Now, this is where we get to the Council of the Indies. Now, the Council of the Indies, or the Consejo Real y Supremo de las Indias, was set up by King Ferdinand in 1511 and was reorganized by his successor, King Charles V, in 1524. The council was given the supreme control over all the colonies in the New World and in the Philippines, presiding over all administrative, civil, military, commercial, and even ecclesiastical matters. Although the king presided over the council, in reality, all matters of the colonies were left up to the management of the council. Now, the council was made up of 1, a president, 2, a chancellor, 3, a crown prosecutor. It was also made up of 2 secretaries, 1 for each of the viceroyalties of New Spain and Peru. It was also made up of 8 ordinary members and other officials. Now, all persons in the council were required to be of Spanish birth, and they also had to be trained in law. Now, most of the council's work was legal-based. The council acted as the Supreme Court of Appeal for the higher courts in the colonies. The council also was the most integral force in enacting any decision made by the king. If the council did not act according to the king's demands in the colonies, his rulership was practically ineffective. And this is where, just as a reminder, we're speaking about the Council of the Indies. Now, the council was responsible for appointing colonial officials, scrutinizing colonial reports, supervising royal revenue collection and expenditure, and they were also responsible for settlement planning and trade. Now, this is where we get to an interesting fellow, King Philip II. Now, the Council of the Indies and Spain's general colonial system were pioneered during the times of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Spain, possibly having an imperial status, then became realized during Ferdinand's successor's reign, King Charles V. However, and here's the interesting part, the weaknesses of Spain's rule became evident during the reign of Charles's son, King Philip II, upon Charles's abdication of the throne. Now, King Philip II had a tight grip on the Spanish colonial administration, especially on the Council of the Indies. However, the grip was so tight that he opted to do a lot of the work of the council for himself. So this is trouble. This meant that work became backlogged and things began progressing very slowly administratively for Spain. Philip also had a high level of distrust for officials. This would have fueled his desire to see things done his way by himself. This distrust not only slowed down progress in the colonies, but it also caused officials to be less effective in their duties. Many of them were scared of being spied upon by the king, which caused them to focus more on appeasing the king and staying out of trouble than carrying out their duties effectively and with integrity. And then there was another issue besides King Philip II's ways of governance. There was also the issue of the governor's powers. Now, King Ferdinand and his successor, King Charles V, they both viewed the governors, primarily the first three governors beginning with Christopher Columbus of Hispaniola, as having too much power. And we would have actually seen this in episode 6 in particular, as well as our look on in episode 9 when we looked at Spanish colonization. So episode 6 and episode 9, I will encourage you to really go and check them out to have a deeper context into this particular statement. Now, the level of power that they were allowed, in turn, allowed them to adopt rulership in the Caribbean as though they were regal figures or kingly figures. This reality could have made it easier for them to rebel against Spain and develop a separate kingdom using Spain's resources. Now, as a result, the Residencia initiative was implemented. This is where an incoming governor would be part of an inquiry into the stint of the outgoing governor to see if there were any abnormalities in the outgoing governor's administration. The new governor would then be subjected to the scrutiny of a visitador, who was an official of the king from Spain who outranked the governor and could call him out for any wrongdoings that were observed. Now, the residencia system was then improved by the establishment of the Viceroyalty of New Spain in 1535. Headed by the viceroy himself, the actions of a governor in the region would be open to investigation by an institution called the Audiencia, which was a legal court consisting of a group of lawyers called oidores, who were under an official known as the fiscal or the public prosecutor. Now, this group eventually carried out administrative duties pretty well. So we want to take a look at the local Spanish governmental system in the Spanish Caribbean. So first of all, we have the title of Viceroy. Now, the Viceroy was directly accountable to the king, but he, of course, was an overseer of many colonies. And then, of course, we have under him, we have the governor. Now, the local people living in the colonies did not have contact that much with the viceroy or with the governor. Now, the local people were directly governed by municipal councils called cabildos. Now, each municipality would have consisted of a major settlement and surrounding lands and minor settlements. Now, each municipality in a colony had a cabildos, this is the little council, had a cabildos presiding over it. Now, the leader of the cabildos was called the alcaldes mayores. He was nominated and chosen by the cabildos. And then the other members of the cabildos were known as the alcaldes ordinarios, or well, really, it wasn't all the other members because these officials were appointed by the cabildos to look after towns and settlements within the municipality. Now, all members of the cabildos were known as regidores. They were at first nominated by the governor. However, the practice of outgoing regidores nominating their successors became an accepted norm. Now, regidores' duties included imposing local taxes, maintaining local defense and policing, and infrastructural development, primarily with roads, hospitals, and developing important buildings, etc. Now, regidores, they were not paid directly by the crown, the viceroy, or the governor. However, they made money by fixing local market prices and by distributing lands. Now, in response to concerns of the growing power and influence of the cabildos, the king appointed corregidores or correctors who would frequently check the work of the cabildos. So they had to check this thing. They had to make sure that these fellas are on point and that they're not trying to overrule any Spanish policy whatsoever. Now, the corregidor was to report directly to the audiencia, which worked alongside the viceregal office. Now, this overall system of local governance was well thought out in theory and it was impressive in structure. However, due to widespread corruption, a slow government machinery, frequent spying and accusations done by the crown's mistrust, and conflicts between officials within colonies, all of these factors contributed to the system's actual lack of long-term effectiveness. Now, this is where we get to the economic developments. And this is where we focus firstly on the influence of gold. Now, Spain's overall purpose was to find gold. Along with the leverage of wealth that it brought in general trade, they needed it to purchase their spices and supplies from the East Indies. Now, Columbus and his men during his second voyage would have found rich gold mines in the mountains of Ciballo in Hispaniola. There, they built the fort of St. Thomas to commence mining activities there. Now, in reality, the amount of gold present on the island was really exaggerated by Christopher Columbus. However, this exaggeration led to a chain of events that saw leaders and settlers after him traveling to the island to pillage it. And while pillaging it, they overworked the local indigenous people. And this was all for the sake of searching for and obtaining gold. Now, in the year 1511, the mainland colony of Darien, and which is modern-day southwestern Panama, it was founded and a gold mine known as Castilla de Oro was discovered there, which superseded the size of the one found in Hispaniola. Then, Hernan Cortes. Cortes's conquest of the Aztecs and the Yucatan Peninsula also allowed him to ship large amounts of gold to Spain. This meant that many Spanish settlers began leaving Hispaniola and the Caribbean islands in general to go to these Central American territories because of the visible prospect of seemingly limitless gold. So how was this gold extracted? The gold was firstly obtained by bartering with the indigenous people. However, that soon ceased and mining for it began. Now, two indigenous males would dig an area of 10 feet by 10 feet or 3 meters by 3 meters, and they would remove the soil to a depth of about 2 feet or 0.5 meters. The removed soil would be washed in a stream using a pan with 2 handles. It will be washed in a stream by an indigenous female or mostly by an indigenous female to search for the presence of gold. Now, if the gold was found in the pan that they washed the soil in, they would dig deeper to try and find more gold. They would also obtain a lot of their gold in the form of what we call alluvial gold. And this was gold that was washed down from the river banks and from the soil, and it was flowing into the river stream and even settling on the riverbed. This is what we call alluvial gold. Now, the Spanish would also go through great lengths to try and obtain gold, such as diverting the flow of rivers to search old riverbeds for alluvial or any deposited gold. The King of Spain and the crown itself was totally in control of the gold production efforts of the colony. The crown was supposed to receive 1/5, which was also known as a quinto, of the gold mined. Now, the gold was then brought to a royal smeltery, stamped with the king's seal, and the king's quinto, or his 1/5, was then extracted to be sent back to Spain. Now, to prevent smuggling, gold going back to Spain had to be compressed and formed into coins that were known as ducats. Now, the Spanish amount that was sent from Hispaniola was seemingly good. However, production skyrocketed with Cortez's acquisition of the Yucatan Peninsula. In 1 year, over 30 million ducats were recorded to have been produced. Now, this large spike in production resulted in a sharp demographic change between the Caribbean and Central America, where many settlers were now going to the Yucatan, Honduras, and Darien, which was in Panama. By the 1520s, gold production in the Caribbean ceased as Central America took up that mantle. However, the Caribbean was about to produce its own form of gold, which would rival the actual gold produced in Central America. And this gold was known as sugarcane. So the beginnings of the sugar industry. Before the colonization of the New World, Europe had obtained sugar, which was used as a substitute to honey, from Cyprus, Sicily, and from Morocco in northern Africa via Arab merchants. Now, the sugarcane, the grass-based plant from which the sugar was obtained, was originally grown in New Guinea. It was also thought that obtaining sugar cubes from the juice of the cane was first done in India. This therefore started the use of sugar. Now, the Spanish had then introduced the sugarcane plant to the Canary Islands in the year 1491. Now, during Columbus's second voyage, the plants were then brought to the plains of Hispaniola, where they were observed to have grown well. It soon became evident that the plant adapted well to the Caribbean climate and soil conditions. Now, there was a variant of sugarcane that was known as the Creole variant, and this sugar variant, it was originally produced in the Caribbean, and it produced a lower yield of juice, but it was pest and disease resistant. By the 18th century, thicker stemmed variants emerged which produced more juice, therefore obtaining more sugar. Now, just like gold, sugar was really expensive. However, just like gold, it was in high demand. Therefore, persons and countries were willing to pay large amounts of money to obtain it, especially with the associated growth in demand for crops and products such as coffee and tea. Now, there were some challenges in starting the sugar industry, and of course, with challenges, there must be solutions. Now, the challenges mainly surrounded three areas: capital, labor, and technology. With the emergence of the sugar industry, there was a great need for capital to invest in it to cause it to grow and blossom and function. There was a need for labor, actual persons who were going to work, and there was a need for technology to make the work not just quicker, but more efficient. Now, vast amounts of land were needed for production. This is because along with the land to grow the sugar on, land had to be acquired to cater for timber, which was for fuel, and it also had to be acquired to cater for grazing animals and crops, which were necessary for food, so that the sugar estate could be self-sufficient, which made sense. There was also a need for equipment such as coppers, furnaces, casks, pots, and of course, carts. Mills were also large. The sugar mills, they were also very large, and they were complex structures that needed to be built. Now, about 12,000 ducats at least were needed to set up such an estate. And these, of course, were monies that local settlers did not freely have access to. But here's a solution. The local government came to the assistance here and loaned the money to persons. Repayments were also made quickly as the profits from sugar were very high. Now, the first sugar mill was created in the year 1516 in the Spanish Indies, and it was created by a physician named González de Veyosa in Yaguate, southern Hispaniola. Now, within a few years, Veyosa had several mills set up as the plant grew rapidly. Diego Velázquez, remember him from episode 9, Diego Velázquez also had carried sugarcane over to Cuba, and eventually Cuba began producing even more sugar than Hispaniola. Now, technological developments were also seen by the help of Canary Island and Jewish engineers who knew the technology that was needed for the sugarcane industry. They helped develop the trapiche, which was a wheel mechanism which, when it was turned by horses, cattle, or humans, it crushed the cane, therefore extracting the juice. This trapiche was then replaced by the ingenio, or what we know as the water-powered sugar mill. Now, the Spanish had therefore solved the challenges of capital, and they solved the challenges of technology. But there was one more challenge to solve, and you know the challenge. It was a challenge concerning the source of labor. Now, here's the thing. The Spanish did not want to subject their own selves to such arduous labor. They didn't want to do that. The Taino people also were declining fast in number, and they were therefore not regarded as a good source of labor. The solution, though, was found through the Portuguese. The Portuguese were the first to use Africans and to enslave them for labor. And for more insight in this, you could check episode 5 where we spoke about this. Now, the Spanish struck a deal with the Portuguese in a series of contracts called asientos, and African slaves were brought on a contractual and frequent basis to provide labor on the sugar plantations. The first asiento occurred in the year 1515. Now, as the industry grew, the issue of agricultural monoculture occurred. The region became so dependent on sugarcane that it failed to diversify in its crop production, primarily to feed those living there. There was also increased competition from the Central American colonies and also from Brazil. The Spanish Caribbean islands therefore had immense difficulty in upkeeping this industry. And this is where we finally come to an important part in considering not just this topic, but in considering the progression of the various events that occurred in Caribbean history. And this is the Spanish's control of trade. Now, Spanish trade operated in an exclusive manner. The crown desired for trade to occur between Spain and the New World only. That's trouble right now. That is gonna lead to some trouble. It seems good. It seems good. Yes, you want to ensure that you are upgraded, but trust me, it's gonna lead to some trouble. Now, the settlers in the colonies did not agree with this, and they desired to trade with other countries. However, Spain was opposed to this. This, along with Spain's growing inability to provide the colonies with the resources that they needed, led to increased tensions between the crown and the colonies. Now, when the prospect of gold and sugarcane producing immense wealth became evident, the Spanish desired to tighten their grip and monopolize the situation even more. To ensure that trade remained exclusive, an institution was set up that was called the Casa de Contratación. Now, the Casa de Contratación, or the House of Trade, was an institution set up in 1503 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Juan de Fonseca orchestrated its formation and initial operation from the city of Seville in Spain. Now, the initial idea was that all trade should occur to and from Seville. However, Seville was not as well facilitated and ideally located as other coastal cities such as Cadiz. Now, the Casa de Contratación was then eventually moved to Cadiz in the year 1718, with free trade being allowed between all Spanish ports and the New World in the year 1778. Now, there were initially 3 royal officers of this institution, the Casa de Contratación. Firstly, there was a treasurer who registered all the gold and the silver that was obtained. Secondly, there was a comptroller who looked over all crew and emigrants. And thirdly, there was a business manager who looked over the fitting of the ships, particularly supplies and ammunition. However, after Amerigo Vespucci's successful voyages, and you can refer to episode 8 to learn more about Amerigo Vespucci's voyages, Vespucci, was added to the Casa in the capacity of chief pilot, and a new additional official position was therefore created. A postmaster general who was responsible for handling letters, secretaries, and legal advisors were subsequently added. Now, the Casa de Contratación was just a government institution that controlled trade and protected the monopoly of Spain, primarily for the interests of the House of Castile. Now, the Casa itself did not conduct trade. All right, it did not conduct trade. So what were the functions? What were the main functions of the Casa de Contratación? Well, here they are. Firstly, their function was to handle all the goods to and from the New World. Secondly, to dispatch ships to the Indies and to register and license them. Thirdly, to register all immigrants to the New World. Now, initially, it was only open to Spanish immigrants, but then Portuguese, Jews, African slaves, and Germans were also allowed to be registered. Fourthly, to act as a maritime court in everything to do with navigation and commerce. Fifthly, to advise the Crown through the Council of the Indies on political and economic matters. Now, this was done to create a complementary relationship and not a competitive one between Spain and her colonies. And sixthly, their function was to collect the duties on trade. Now, each colony had a branch of the Casa de Contratación at their principal port where duties were levied on imports and exports, and those duties varied from 2.5% to 7.5%. Import taxes were pretty high on slaves in the New World, rising as high as 7.5% and even beyond. Now, these import taxes in the New World, though high, they were meant to, 1, profit Spain, and 2, cover the cost of operating a convoy system for ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean that Spain developed. And you're probably wondering, what kind of convoy system is this? This is where we now begin to look at a convoy system that Spain developed known as the Flota and Armada system. So the Flota and Armada system. Now, the Casa de Contratación operated a 2-port system to simplify trade. Every ship had to leave Seville, Spain, and had to dock in Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, before heading elsewhere. This was an absolute requirement. Now, ships that did not check in with these 2 ports were considered as smugglers. Now, things are going to intensify from this system, all right? By the year 1540, Havana, Cuba replaced Santo Domingo as the other principal docking port. So now it was Seville, Spain, and Havana, Cuba. Now, this 2-port system allowed for the ease of checks to ensure that supplies were not lost. It also made the routes easy and standard for navigation. However, it also made it easier for rogue ships operated by enemy nations and pirates to attack the Spanish vessels. As a result of this, the Flota and Armada system was put in place. Now, fleets of merchant ships were sent from Spain twice a year under the protection of Spanish warships. The Flota left in May bound for Veracruz in New Spain via either the islands of Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, or Puerto Rico. And the Armada sailed in August towards Nombre de Dios, which is in Panama. Now, the floater would remain in Veracruz until February. It would then sail to Havana to wait for the Armada, which would be traveling from Panama. Now, both the floater and the Armada would then meet up in Havana, Cuba, and they would sail for Spain in the month of March. And this is a nice map, so you can pause it right here to just look at this map to get a good idea of how the flow of the floater and the Armada system really was. It's a very interesting map, so you could just pause and just take a very good look at it. Now, for the most part, the floater and the Armada system was successful in protecting the Spanish treasure fleet. Now, this fleet consisted of ships bringing gold from the Yucatan Peninsula and Panama, as well as ships bringing silver from the Potosi mines in the Viceroyalty of Peru. Now, only a few ships were actually captured by pirates using this system, which is very good. Of all the coordinators of this treasure fleet route, which was utilizing the floater and Armada system, Admiral Pedro Menendez de Aviles was the most famous. He served as High Commander of the Treasure Fleet Project from 1554 to 1574, which was the year that he'd actually died. Now, the system that he put in place ensured that there were no ships lost between 1567 and 1627, an almost 60-year period of no loss of ships and therefore no loss of precious gold and silver. That is impressive. Now, the impressive nature of his system of managing the floater and Armada system was made even more evident when it was observed that for the next 150 years, the Spanish using his system only lost 3 ships. That's impressive. That's impressive. Very, very impressive. He firstly did this by introducing a system of ships or smaller boats called armadillas. Now, armadillas were squadrons of light, fast ships that would protect the actual convoys, and they would patrol the shipping lanes of the Caribbean, even when the floater and the Armada were not sailing. That's smart. He also did this by, secondly, planning to fortify certain key ports in the Caribbean, such as Havana, Santo Domingo, San Juan, and Cartagena, which is in Colombia. Now, Menendez's efforts were valiant, but after years, his system began experiencing immense trouble. Now, while certain forts were fortified and the floater, Armada, and Armadillos were doing their best to protect fleets, smaller Spanish settlements began complaining. You're probably wondering, why are they complaining? They began complaining of raiders who were not Spanish, who were roaming the Caribbean seas. These roamers were, in fact, they weren't Spanish, as we just said. They were, in fact, English and French sailors who became famously known as Las Piratas, or pirates. And this is where we come to an end of our look at the Spanish colonial administration in the Caribbean. Now, in our next episode, we're going to begin taking a look at European rivalry, because remember, the Spanish had a monopoly in this region, but no, other European nations are going to say, nah, we're seeing too many riches here. Enough is enough. So they're going to step in, and there's going to be a European rivalry. And in our next episode, we'll specifically take a look at the pirates and privateers. But this has been another episode of Island Uplift's history class, and I hope to see you in the next one. But for now, class dismissed.